In modern times, the nation-state of Switzerland has the reputation of being a peaceful nation, neutral in all conflicts since at least the Napoleonic Wars. However, the Swiss of the past were anything but peaceful. Welcome to our first of two videos on the Swiss Reichslaufer mercenaries, arguably the first soldiers of early modern war. Thank you to ExpressVPN for sponsoring this video. Protecting our privacy online is easier than ever with ExpressVPN. With just one click, all of your data going in and out of our phones and computers is encrypted and protected from the peering eyes of large corporations, internet service providers, and government. Without a VPN, internet service providers in the US can legally sell our data to ad companies. ExpressVPN also protects us from hackers on unencrypted Wi-Fi networks who want to steal our private information like passwords, financial details, or even our emails. This protection comes in handy when traveling and we need to access our YouTube account while on sketchy public Wi-Fi. To find out how you can get 3 months free of the #1 rated VPN provider, visit expressvpn.com/kingsandgenerals. The original inhabitants of modern Switzerland were the infamous Celtic Helvetii tribe, eventually subdued by Julius Caesar and the Romans beginning in the 1st century BC. Becoming freeborn citizens of the empire like so many others around the Mediterranean world. Despite suffering many invasions after the fall of the Western Empire, the inhabitants of the lands which would later become known as Switzerland remained free and independent until the late 13th century. Such autonomy was primarily a function of geography. Even today, when picturing Switzerland in our minds, we get the impression of a naturally beautiful land spotted with forested hills, valleys, and mountain ranges, and this influenced the region's political structures. The many valley communities of modern-day Switzerland, divided by treacherous mountain ranges as they were often just left to run their own affairs. Despite being technically subjects of the Holy Roman Emperor, they enjoyed a status of imperial immediacy, which granted them a degree of autonomy. The oligarchic nature of these communities at the local level, which came to be known as cantons, was contrasted by a sense of autonomy at the regional, national, and international level. They were used to enjoying and defending their own collective way of life. The relatively hostile landscape provided the baseline for potential combat readiness among the population. Even among young boys, the threat of hostile wildlife such as wolves and bears, complemented by the possible menace presented by aggressive neighbours, made martial skill and self-defense necessary. 1291 was a crucial year in Swiss history and to the development of its population into formidable troops. 3 small cantons on the shore of Lake Luzerne, Uri, Schwyz and Unterwalden, collectively known as the Waldstädter or Forest Cantons, formed an alliance known as the Schweizerrische, the Swiss Confederation. But what prompted such autonomous and often feuding local communities into making this alliance? Increasing domestic prosperity in the Swiss lands during the 13th century was primarily due to pasturing of horses and cattle, leading to a sharp increase in production of dairy products. The increasing size of economic structures was naturally beneficial to the inhabitants of valleys and cities alike, while the development of transportation infrastructure in the Gotthard Mountain Pass, beginning in the 1220s, facilitated more efficient commercial activity with the Low Countries and Italy. The region's prosperity painted an obvious target on the back of the cantons. Late in the 13th century, the Austrian Habsburgs started coveting the control of the increasing traffic between 2 halves of the Holy Roman Empire. In 1291, Habsburg Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf I encroached on the Confederation's independence by seizing the crucial city of Luzerne, and this led to the creation of this alliance. Swiss infantry tactics underwent a substantial transformation during the Wars for Freedom and Independence, which began in the late 1200s and went on for centuries after. However, the development can be divided into 2 main stages. The first period, ranging from 1315 to 1422, and then the second, from 1444 to 1499 and beyond. First, we'll go through the initial stage, characterized by the employment of simple yet deadly tactics to gain victory. One of the first occasions where such tactics were used was at the Pass of Morgarten in 1315. Schwyz was one of the first Waldstädter to assert its autonomy against the Habsburgs by plundering a protected monastery at Einsiedeln, an act which naturally prompted a military response. They faced an Austrian army of around 9,000 troops, including 2,000 of the finest and noblest mounted knights of the empire, commanded by Holy Roman Emperor Leopold I. It's worth noting that at this time in military history, the mounted knight was the elite of feudal society and the crème de la crème of medieval armies. This highly trained, well-equipped fighting man would crush their Swiss peasant opponents with ease, or so it was thought. Realizing that this relatively large Austrian force, at least by medieval standards, vastly outnumbered their own modest 1,300 men, Schwyz's population retreated behind a sophisticated system of earthworks and palisades. Leopold I was aware of this and chose to advance at its weakest point through the pass at Morgarten. As the Austrian army approached the pass in a long column, its vanguard of knights found the route to be blocked by enemy defences. Detouring around this, they then engaged a small group of enemies stubbornly blocking their line of march at the hamlet of Schafstetten. When this stubborn group managed to block the Austrians, it turned a mobile army into a static, exposed mass of men. One group of Swiss was used to split the knightly vanguard from their infantry comrades by blocking the narrow path with debris, while another charged out of the woods and engaged the enemy knights. A shower of stones was used as a makeshift missile weapon before the ferocious axe and halberd-wielding Swiss infantry charged and cut the Austrians to pieces after driving them into the marshes behind. 2,000 invading troops met their deaths at Morgarten, most of them knights. This battle struck fear into the mounted nobles of Europe, and showed that the Swiss lacked any respect for them or for the Gentile viewpoint that battles had to be fought like a tournament with ethics and etiquette. It was the benefits of a surprise attack, combined with the skillful use of the terrain, which resulted in Swiss success at Morgarten. However, favourable terrain wasn't the only situation in which men of the cantons were skilled fighters, as shown at Laupen in 1339, when another Swiss force defeated its enemy on an open field. As the 14th century wore on, the initial signatories of the Confederacy were joined by other cantons such as Lucerne, Zurich, Zug, and Bern. At the same time, ambitious Austrian Duke Leopold III precipitated hostilities by attempting to expand his domain into Switzerland, resulting in the beginning of war in late 1385. When the two armies met northeast of Sempach on July 9, 1386, the two main Austrian columns were confronted by a Swiss vanguard advancing rapidly, seeking to gain its terrain advantage. Neither force had time to deploy effectively in this rushed situation, but the Austrian knights were forced to dismount due to the unsuitability of the land for a cavalry attack. Shortly before midday, the lightly armoured Confederate halberdiers clashed with the dismounted lance-bearing knights of Leopold in a wedge formation, its point angled to the right flank. Despite the better-equipped Austrians inflicting significant casualties at first, the dogged Swiss did not flinch and reconfigured their formation. Showing the grit which would eventually be so valued in the Swiss, it is reported that one soldier, known as Winkelried, bravely threw himself at the lances of knights opposing him, jumping on the points and snapping their shafts in the process. With their pike shell broken, the dismounted Austrian knights were no match for the lethal Swiss halberdiers, who quickly poured through the breach and began their unstoppable charge. The enemy was cut to pieces, and even fresh ducal reinforcements couldn't break the Confederate push. Within 2 hours the battle had turned, and around 1,800 Austrians were dead on the field, along with a meagre 200 Swiss. It was now clear that the almost unarmoured halberdier could hold his own against the Great Knight. A landmark moment in Swiss military tactics came in 1422 at the Battle of Abbado. Territorial disputes between some of the cantons and the Duchy of Milan led to yet another war over the city of Bellinzona. 2,500 Confederate soldiers marched on the city, and a massive 16,000 strong Milanese army, including 5,000 cavalry, marched to stop them. On June 30th, the Condottieri commander, Basune de Carmagnola, launched a surprise attack on a Swiss camp near Bellinzona, and its Confederate denizens rallied into a square formation and managed to repel repeated assaults from the Milanese cavalry attacks, upon which they dismounted. Nevertheless, they took heavy losses, and a subsequent general assault managed to gradually drive the Swiss back. After doggedly suffering and dishing out damage for a long time, the Swiss simply turned, cut their way through the enemy ranks, and withdrew in good order, having suffered 500 dead. In addition to showing remarkable discipline in that the Canton troops didn't just rout, Abbado also marked a crucial moment because it forced the Swiss to get rid of the halberd as their primary weapon, to be replaced by the long pike. Shortly after the battle, a council held at Luzerne issued instructions to increase the proportion of pikemen in Canton contingents. This seemingly mundane decision would eventually revolutionize military thinking and practice because of the weapon's unique characteristics. Due to the massive length of the pike, it could not be utilized individually to any great effect at all. Much like the sarissa-wielding phalangists of Philip II and Alexander the Great, they were greater than the sum of their parts and had to be employed en masse in a phalanx. The proper simultaneous handling of the pike would require a massive amount of training in order to move and fight as one, with only highly competent drilled troops able to effectively perform necessary maneuvers. The first 4 ranks of Swiss pikemen would level their weapons to a 90-degree angle, creating an impenetrable wall of iron heads, while the 5th rank and beyond would hold their weapons upright, ready to fill any gaps where necessary. The weapon's length meant that it was necessary for each rank to hold the weapon differently from 1st to 4th. The front rank would kneel down with their weapon held low, the 2nd stooped with the weapon's butt anchored under their right foot, while the 3rd held it at waist level and the 4th at head height, forming a multi-layered spiny shield from head to toe. This classic pike phalanx could stop any cavalry charge in its tracks, as the horses would either refuse to charge at the pikes or be skewered instantly and rendered useless if they did. Moreover, the forest of pikes held upright from the 5th rank and behind gave the Swiss pike blocks considerable protection against enemy arrows or other projectiles which might fall on them from above. This was due to the sheer volume of shafts which was present in such a small space. In short, this formation was a Macedonian phalanx redeveloped for the medieval age. As unbreakable on the defence as a Swiss pike block was, simply stopping enemy attacks didn't content the often belligerent soldiers of this land. They also quickly mastered the handling of a pike in an offensive manner as well, becoming capable of launching attacks which developed a devastating and inexorable momentum. When on the advance, the pike was held horizontally at chest level, the right arm placed to the back and the left arm forward, with the weapon itself angled slightly downwards. A heroic stand by a small Confederate reconnaissance force at Saint-Jacob-en-Biers in 1444 was the first major occasion on which the pike was tested after its adoption. When the 100 Years' War stalled in 1444 with the Treaty of Tours, the peace left France's king Charles VII with a large mercenary army composed mainly of Armagnacs. He subsequently allied with Habsburg Emperor Friedrich III and sent 40,000 men into Confederate territories. 1,200 Swiss were sent as a reconnaissance force to the fortress of Farnsburg, where they were joined by 300 Bassel reinforcements on August 25th. That night, the Armagnac army sent scouts to observe the Swiss camp. To their surprise, it was all too clear that the Confederates were making no attempt at all to conceal themselves. At daybreak, the Swiss advanced down a valley and skirmished a few times with the French cavalry, progressing throughout the day to the Birs River. By now, the fighting spirit and hunger for battle amongst the rank and file was getting out of control, and they wanted to press on. When their commander suggested a tactical retreat in the face of overwhelming numbers, there was an uproar in the Swiss ranks. They wanted to fight. The officers, unable to persuade their men to withdraw, gave the order to cross the river. After fording the Birs River, the Swiss were almost immediately faced with the entire 40,000-strong French mercenary army. Though the situation was grim, it's possible that retreat was an option even at this point, but the Swiss dismissed any thought of it. They would fight. 3 parallel squares were formed, with each comprised of 500 men. Over 25% of the Swiss troops were equipped with the pike at this battle, and their subsequent charge into the enemy lines produced a deadlock which lasted for 4 hours. This was a phenomenal achievement all by itself. The Confederates were massively outnumbered, but their bravery and tactics were nevertheless grinding the enemy to a halt. After 5 hours of battle and a failed relief attempt by reinforcing Basel troops, the Swiss squares began to weaken, inflicting massive casualties the entire time as they withdrew to the hospital of St. Jacob. After stubborn Swiss resistance inside the walls and a final storming of the defensible facility, brutal hand-to-hand combat began in which the Swiss army fought to the last man. It is said that every single Confederate was killed, but they took with them a massive toll of 4,000 enemies. This battle is viewed in Swiss history as their Thermopylae, becoming both a shining example of both Swiss courage and indiscipline. It was clear, however, that a more systematic approach to tactics and battle formations was needed by the mid-15th century. Confederate battle formations commonly consisted of 3 columns: the Vorhut or vanguard, the Gewalthaufen or center, and the Nachhut or rear. These 3 contingents had no set size and depended entirely on the situation and terrain of any specific battle. The vanguard was usually the largest or second largest unit, with the vast majority of crossbowmen and handgunners interspersed between the corps of pikemen. It was this contingent which came into contact first, but it also carried out reconnaissance and engineering work. The centre was almost always the largest unit in any Swiss formation, and it was here that the Confederate banner would be found, encircled by a group of bodyguards almost exclusively using the halberd as a weapon. This corps of halberdiers was surrounded by a wall of pikemen which formed the rest of the centre. The rear was the smallest group most of the time, and had the role of either supporting the centre or detaching to the flanks and advancing on the sides of an enemy formation. In a battle situation, the 3 contingents advanced in echelon. The vanguard marched to attack a predetermined point in the enemy line, while the centre would advance parallel but slightly behind and to the left or right. The rear would follow the centre in a similar manner, but it would also often stop as a strategic reserve before any choice was made to commit it. With the establishment of the Swiss as a formidable and organised fighting force, possessing an increasingly fearsome reputation, we'll leave them. In our next video on the Swiss, we will conclude their development in the Burgundian Wars, outline how they began mercenary service, and how they eventually declined in prominence. Our mini-series on the Swiss mercenaries will be concluded in the coming months, so make sure you are subscribed to our channel and have pressed the bell button. We would like to express our gratitude to our Patreon supporters and channel members who make the creation of our videos possible. Now you can also support us by buying our merchandise via the link in the description. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.